Hello, everybody, and welcome to the September 29th edition of Off the Deaton Path. My name is Stan Deaton with the Georgia Historical Society, and we welcome you to another edition of Off the Deaton Path. We are recording this week from the Marshall House Hotel, and in particular, we are in the lobby right next to the 45 Bistro Bar, and we're talking this week about fall beers, seasonal beers. And now we have our first guest star on Off the Deaton Path. I want to welcome my friend Chuck Mobley, formerly of the Savannah Morning News. Chuck, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Stan. Wonderful to be here.
Chuck, you, among many other hats that you've worn, you were many years ago and you are a Vietnam War veteran. And a couple of weeks ago, I did a podcast about Ken Burns' Vietnam War series. And I just want to ask you very quickly, have you been watching the show?
Every night.
And what's your impression of it so far?
It's wonderfully presented. I think Mr. Burns has tried very hard to present everybody's side, the American side, the South Vietnamese side, the North Vietnamese side, and to show how complex and complicated and tragic the war was.
And you so far, you like what you've seen?
Yes, I have, very much.
Does it seem familiar to you? Does it seem like something that you went through yourself, or does it seem like watching a movie about something you have no idea?
At times it seems both. I was at many of the locations, but not some of the others. I'm enthralled by his depictions of the DMZ, or as it was called then, the Dead Marine Zone, and showed just how awful the fighting was there on both sides, how men on both sides suffered, and how astonishingly brave my often criticized baby boomer peers were in that country.
Well, I appreciate your insight, and you and I have talked many times about different events and periods in American history, and you actually lived that one, and so you're not only the first guest we've had on Off the Deaton Path, but you're the first Vietnam veteran, so I appreciate your insights into that. We'll keep watching, and maybe we'll get back together. I know we will, because we'll want to get together and talk about winter beers, and we'll recap the whole Vietnam documentary with Ken Burns. But I brought you on the show here tonight because you also, in your other career, you were a longtime reporter for the Savannah Morning News. You worked there how long?
31 years and one day.
One day. And you started working there in
1980.
And you left in 2010 on what day?
2011.
2011.
It was like December the 1st, and I had started working on November 30th of 1980.
So you got the extra day of pension when they cut you loose.
Well, actually, I got one more month of insurance coverage because of that one day. So
one of the things I know that you did for the Savannah Morning News, because I used to read it avidly, was you always reviewed seasonal beers or fall beers. You were sort of review beers, period, right?
We had this, and I thought it was just it was wonderful. This segment of the paper called Brew You.
Yes, I remember that.
Where my friends Tim Rutherford, Cynthia Crichton-Jones, and I would sit around and drink 6 or 7 beers. Say 6 or 7 Pilsners, and we'd say which ones we thought were the best and which ones we thought maybe you shouldn't spend your hard-earned money on.
Yeah, I remember you reviewed many different beers all the time, but seasonal beers especially. So I wanted to have you on the podcast to talk about autumn is here, right? October is next week. So people like me are going to be looking for good fall beers. And so I wanted to get your insights into what they should buy. But also we're going to back up a little bit and talk about the whole idea, the whole notion of a seasonal beer is kind of a new thing, right? I mean, in the period in which you grew up, and really me too, just a few years later, but in the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, the average American beer drinker who went out in October, there were no new seasonal beers, right? The whole idea of a fall beer is new. Budweiser did not come out with a new fall Budweiser, or Anheuser-Busch, I should say, didn't come out with a new fall beer, right?
No, I mean, it's old, but it's new. I mean, the drinking of them in America is new, but the Oktoberfest style, the Marzen, dates back to 1810 to a wedding in Bavaria, a royal family wedding, and they came out with something special. The Marzen, which Marzen means March in Germany, and that's when they brewed the beer, and they would cellar it until October, and that's when they would drink it.
And so the whole idea of a seasonal beer, I mean, originally before refrigeration, beer was brewed at certain times of the year, and it was stored in the warmer months, right? And you waited for it to ferment, and you would drink it primarily in the fall and in the winter, and that's when it was brewed. You also the harvest needed to come in so that you could get the ingredients for beer. So the tradition of seasonal beer goes back many, many years.
Certainly, but like you said, in America, the brewing was much less specific. I mean, it was like Budweiser, Falstaff, Coors, Miller, and you drank the same beers all year long.
Hey Mabel, Black Label, all of that, right? I mean, that you went and you bought what was available,
yes,
right? And they did not worry about providing a seasonal beer, a different flavor.
And the drinking public per se wasn't looking for that either.
I remember the Miller Lite commercials growing up, right, in the 70s, and that seemed to be tastes great, less filling. So all of this really begins with the microbrewery boom, which starts in this country at least, I think, in the 1980s. Am I right?
Yes, I mean you had early pioneers, Anchor Brewing in San Francisco, which I think dates back to the mid '60s.
Yeah,
but
65.
A lot of this concerned distribution. Nationally distributed beers are a pretty new impact. Like Smokey and the Bandit is driving a truckload of Coors,
yes,
because no one on the East Coast gets to drink Coors. So
right, east of the Mississippi, before a certain year, you couldn't get Coors. Right?
You could not,
and beer was not available here.
And so and in the 80s, I think the distribution started to change, and plus the people wanted something more. They wanted something different. It was a new generation, and they were looking for different tastes, different beers.
I think Sam Adams is a very popular, now pretty commercial, probably the most commercial microbrewery. It started at one time. I don't know if it's considered a microbrewery now or not, but they have a lot of seasonal beers. They come out with a fall package, a box full of fall beers. They might be the most commercially successful small brewery, but there are many other ones out there. What is a typical fall beer? I mean, what kind of varieties are we talking about?
Probably mostly two. You've got the Marzen, the traditional German beer, which is malty, dark copper in color, and it's a very smooth, very easy drinking beer. And then you also have the pumpkin beers, which are, the past few years have just exploded in popularity. And
they all taste like some variety of pumpkin, right?
They all taste like pumpkin pie, basically.
Yeah.
But if you like those are fine. But there's very little to distinguish between, say, a pumpkin beer from Harpoon, from a pumpkin beer to Dogfish Head. I mean, there's just so much you can do with pumpkin in a beer.
Yeah, or anywhere else.
Yes.
Really, yeah. And before we go any further, because this is a podcast about history, we've all seen these T-shirts and signs where Ben Franklin supposedly said, you go in any brewery and you can buy a T-shirt in the souvenir shop that says, Ben Franklin said, beer is proof that God loves us and wants us to be happy. And I'm here to tell you that is an absolute lie. Ben Franklin never said that. What he did say, in a letter to a friend in 1779, he was writing to a French friend, He was in Paris, and he said, quote, "We hear of the conversion of water into wine at the marriage of Cana, as of a miracle. But this conversion is, through the goodness of God, made every day before our eyes. Behold the rain which descends from heaven upon our vineyards, and which incorporates itself with the grapes to be changed into wine. A constant proof that God loves us and loves to see us happy." He was talking about wine. But of course, people who love beer, they like that anyway, because it's true, right? Beer is proof that God loves us and wants to be happy. So, seasonal beers that one might see. Let's start in the spring with the kind of things that you might see. What sets off a seasonal beer as we go through the year? I made some notes here, and I've got things like lambic in the spring, strong lagers, Bocks, which I think can be had probably in spring and winter. What are these beers about? Or do you know?
Spring beers, to me, are going to be light. Ales, for the most part, light in color, light in alcohol. Mm-hmm. They'll be refreshing. You've just come out of the dark days of winter where you were forced to drink porters and stouts as the weather closed in on you.
Yeah, very Dickensian.
Right? Yes. So to me, the spring beers are like a Sasson.
Yes.
Something that's got the little yeast bite to it. Something like an Omahang Hennepin. That to me would be a really good spring beer.
Saison, by the way, is the French word for season. So literally, that's what that means. And in summer, you see a little bit of the same thing, like light, citrus, fruity beers, wheat beers, ales.
Wheat beers are really good in the summer. You get like the German. You have the German Hefeweizen, which has bananas and cloves and is very refreshing. Or you also have the Wit beer, which is in Belgium. It's WIT, so wheat beer, and that'll usually have coriander or orange, and it's just a variation on the wheat theme. Mm-hmm. But those are both basically wheat beers.
Gotcha. And then we move into our current season, an autumn beer, a fall beer. Again, I think you're going to see it made, correct me if I'm wrong, with things like cinnamon, nutmeg, pumpkin, as you mentioned. You do see some spiced ales this time of year, wheat beer. I mean, one of the beers that I love is Sam Adams Oktoberfest, which is, they also have a pumpkin. In fact, they have one this year in the fall pack called 20 pounds of pumpkin, and it's pumpkin-y. If you like that kind of thing, you'll like that kind of thing. Porters and stouts, you're already beginning to see darker beers, right? In part because this is the kind of things that were available at the harvest in autumn. So in tradition, you're going to make beers that are darker and made out of these things.
It's also, the porters and the stouts are more alcoholic. So, as you move through the calendar, you'll be doing less physical activity, or people used to do less physical activity in the fall.
So that harvest is coming in, right? You've got ingredients. Yeah, you need something. You don't mind being a little bit heavier, filled up,
right?
Because you're not working as much outside. And in winter, you've got more of the same, right? You've got things called winter warmers, right? Dark ales, Bocks, malty beers, really, what we're talking about.
It's this wonderful beer dichotomy, the malty beers and the hoppy beers. And for those of us like myself who's a hophead, I'll drink the hoppy beers all year long. I'll occasionally wander over and get a porter or a stout. I'm very fond of Old Rasputin Russian Imperial Stout. But when you're with the stouts and the porters, you're talking about 8, 9, 10% ABV, so you need to be at home in your recliner.
Strapped down.
Yes. Far away from your car and your car keys.
And you could cut that with a knife. I mean, you can slice that stuff up. It's pretty thick. Oh, well, okay, so we've talked about what these things are and the different varieties and what they're made out of. Now let's talk specifics for our audience who are thinking, well, what do you recommend that I go out? Because that's one of the things you did in the paper that I always loved, that you would say, if you go to your local adult beverage warehouse, as I like to call it, what should they look for? What's good this time of year? What do you recommend?
For the Marzens, and again, there's not this isn't a huge flavor arc. They're all going to taste fairly much the same. There are two imports I like, Ayinger and Paul Ayinger, and Paulaner, Paulaner. Those are both German Marzens. The Germans, as they are wont to be, are very specific about these beers, and if these are not the best Marzens out there, they're at the very top, and these are good, solid Marzens. Nationally, Sierra Nevada makes a very good Marzen, as does Left Hand and as does Brooklyn, but I really like the Service Brewing, our local brewery. They have a wonderful Marzen here in Savannah.
Yeah.
And I'll spare you my butchering of the name in German.
Oh, don't. Go ahead.
It's the German for devil dog, which is what the Germans named the Marines in World War I.
Really?
Because the Marines were such ferocious opponents.
The American Marines.
The American Marines. So this is a tribute to the Marines from Service Brewing. And I think it's as good a Marzen as you can buy anywhere on the market.
Okay. Now, with that, for our listening audience who are not in Savannah, is Service available now outside here? Do you know? I don't mean to put you on the spot.
I know they're available statewide. I happened to wander through a Total Wine in Marietta last week, and Service beers were available there. So I would think they're available in the local area in Georgia and in South Carolina.
Okay, like you said, it's all about distribution, so they probably are out there more now. In terms of other beers that aren't Marzens, of pumpkin beers, there are a lot of them. I know you can walk into any adult beverage center or a place where these are sold, and you can see, as you said, there's Harpoon, there's all kinds of pumpkin beers. Are there some that you like more than others?
Yes. I like New Holland Ichabod Ale, which has...
That's wonderful. We like literary things here on the
We do. And it has the Headless Horseman on the label.
I've seen that.
And Terrapin has a Pumpkin Fest, which I think is...
And Terrapin is made where?
In Athens.
Yeah, it's a Georgia beer.
And it's got a little hop thing to it, but it's not hoppy. But I like that a lot. But my favorite pumpkin beer is the Harpoon Pumpkin UFO.
Really? Okay. It is good. I've had that.
It is good. And if you can find it on draft, drink all you can.
So, do you like a good pumpkin beer because it tastes really pumpkin-y or less pumpkin-y, or what makes it good? This is a silly question, but a pumpkin beer is a pumpkin beer.
A pumpkin beer is a pumpkin beer.
And if you don't like pumpkin, is it safe to say you will not like a pumpkin beer?
Yes, it is very safe to say you would not. If you don't like pumpkin pie, don't order
a pumpkin.
Yeah. And
I would say try it. At least try it.
And a lot depends upon where you are and what you're eating. Most pumpkin beers are not that alcoholic, so you can drink several of them in a sitting, which I think is in their favor.
Okay. All right. Are there other beers out this fall that you think are worth taking a look at? If you walk in and you can build your own six-pack, as you can in some of these places, would you recommend going for certain other things? I mean, I tend to like, as I mentioned, the ones that are pretty straightforward. Like Yuengling has a good fall beer. Unlike some of the other bigger brewers, they make a good fall beer. Oktoberfest, I mentioned that with Sam Adams. But also there are who's the Texas brewer that makes I don't know, if you can't think of it, I can't either right now. I can't remember the name of it, but there are lots of good.
If you're a beer drinker, these are good times. There's a lot of good stuff out there, and
not just for fall. You mean,
right,
and Sierra and some brewers. Well, I guess here's what I was going for. Some brewers, like Sierra Nevada, they mix up. What you buy this year is not what you bought last fall.
No, it'll change, right?
It's different every year. And Anchor does some of the same things. I think they come up. Good beer.
And I really enjoy going into locally. Habersham does this, Habersham Beverage, where you can get your mixed 6-pack.
Yeah.
So
You can do it at Whole Foods also.
at Whole Foods and several other places.
Yep.
I think Fresh Market
Yep.
does it as well, and Kroger, and Publix. So you go in and it gives you an opportunity to say maybe you're listening tonight and you've never had a pumpkin beer. You can go in and maybe you can get one Harpoon Pumpkin UFO.
Yeah,
and
you don't have to invest
right,
$15
and so you take that home and you go, oh, this is really good. Or, well, what in the world was he talking about?
We're going to water
this
the
is
plants
awful.
with this. It's so bad. Yeah, exactly. Go wash the car with it. Okay. And it's going to drive me crazy because I can't think of the name of this Texas beer company that makes the seasonal beers. But for instance, Sam Adams always comes out with a 12-pack of a variety pack, basically, and a lot of other brewers do that as well. It's a great way to buy. There's usually 6 different beers, 2 each, and you can sort of check out the different things that they have. They have a red maple, Sam Adams does. They have black lager, the heavier beers that you would expect from autumn and winter. And in case I don't get you back on before Christmas, there are some beers that come out every year from Sam Adams and other places that are really Christmas beers that you have reviewed that I know you like. You want to talk about those?
Maybe the best of those is Celebration, which is a wonderful IPA from Sierra Nevada. They just do it for Christmas. That's one of my favorites. And I happen to even like, is it Old Fezziwig from
Old Fezziwig Ale from Sam Adams,
which pretty much encompasses all my knowledge of Charles Dickens. But it's a good beer. I like the Sam Adams mixed 6-packs, but
they have Holiday Porter, Old Fezziwig Ale, all of these, yeah.
But I do wish they would leave the Boston Lager out of it. I mean, how many anybody who's had beer has had like 200,000 bottles of Boston Lager, because you got to get it in their mixed 12 packs.
And if anything, they should substitute the Boston Ale, which is not as easy to find and is very good as well. Yeah, I agree with you. You always get the Boston Lager. And usually some throwaway beers, they have had a problem moving, and they will put that in there as well. Shiner Bock is what I was thinking about. Shiner beer in Texas, they make a great fall beer as well that I can't remember the name of it. If you find Shiner and the fall beer, you'll have it.
They make several interesting seasonals. I think they've got I think it's Shiner. They've got like a prickly pear.
That's it. Yep.
Which
strawberry.
Interesting thing about Shiner, that was Lance Armstrong's favorite beer, was the Shiner beer. And
while he was juicing or before?
I maybe even during. I'm not sure, but he was a big Shiner fan.
Okay.
But
because he's from Texas.
And they also have like a raz. They have a wide range of beers. A grapefruit.
They have a grapefruit. They have a strawberry. You're right. They usually come out with 2 or 3 different seasonal beers all through the seasons. And of course, they're Shiner. To me, it's just one of the best beers you can buy. I mean, most people don't know about it outside of Texas. I guess it's more national beer than it used to be. But in all of this, just to be fair to some of the bigger companies, you mentioned Coors. We talked about Anheuser-Busch. We talked about Miller. Even though they have branched out from their traditional stuff, they don't really make seasonal beers, do they?
InBev has aggressively bought craft breweries over the past couple of years. They bought Goose Island in, I think they're in Chicago.
Yep.
They recently bought Wicked Weed in Asheville. So they're
leaving the brands alone.
So and they pay enormous prices for these breweries. So they've enlarged their footprint without making you think you're buying a Budweiser.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
and I have I have friends who are such beer purists that they will now no longer drink Goose Island or Wicked Weed
Because they sold out.
Right. But you know, if you're some guy then you've worked your whole life and somebody says I'll pay you $1 billion, which some of them have paid for the breweries. I mean, how do you say no to that?
Yeah, and if they can do it without compromising the quality of what they sell, and you know, I guess it depends on how much of a purist you want to be. So, is there anything we haven't covered with the seasonal beers that you'd like to mention while we're still standing? We're not standing, we're sitting. And I should mention that no beers were harmed in the recording of this podcast.
There are so many good beers out there, and I would urge people to put your Bud Light aside and go down the aisle and look at, you know, you don't want to jump immediately into Old Rasputin, but look for a Pilsner, you know, look for something, take a step or two into the craft beer scene. There is so much good beer out there, and it just because you've had a Bud Light for dinner every night for the past 24 years doesn't mean you can't try something new.
And you're drinking history, right?
You're drinking history, and Budweiser, though it remains...
I don't mean you're drinking history of Bud Light. But when you go to a seasonal beer, you're literally hearkening back to the earliest days.
Yes. And
brewing.
Interesting enough, pumpkin beers, of course, originated in New England, the Puritans. And the Puritans landed at Plymouth Rock in 1620 because the Mayflower was running out of beer. And
the Sam Adams Brewery was right there in Boston. And so luckily enough for them, I'm making all of that up.
Well, is it Nathaniel Philbrick in his book on the Mayflower recounts how you couldn't drink the water because it would kill you.
Exactly.
And they were running out of beer, so they said, look, you got to get off here because we got to get back to England on this amount of beer.
Yeah.
So,
and that was true through most of the 18th century.
Yes.
17th and 18th century, the water supply usually locally could not be trusted, and so they
have a beer.
Rum,
right.
They brewed their own beer. Obviously, very different from what we have today, but still, it does harken back to the earliest days of American history. So, yeah, you're having a glass of little American history when you drink something besides Bud Light, right?
Yes.
And I should note, we're not being paid to say that. We're doing it of our own free will. Well, Chuck, this has been a real treat. You're the first guest star on Off the Deaton Path. I appreciate you coming out and sharing your insight and your knowledge about Vietnam and about beer, and I look forward to having you back on here again.
My pleasure, Stan. I hope to return.
Thank you. And with that, we're going to wind up our podcast tonight of Off the Deaton Path. Our producer tonight is Barry Allen. And as always, I ask you if you have anything negative to say, and no one could possibly have anything negative to say about this podcast, please send all of your comments and insults and mean things to Barry. If you have anything nice to say and you just want to compliment us on how much you love the podcast, please write to me directly at sdeaton@georgiahistory.com. You can learn about everything the Georgia Historical Society is doing at georgiahistory.com. And as always, please take a moment to check out my blog at Off the Deaton Path. Our legal counsel this week and every week are the law offices of Gallupo and Taylor, where their motto is, if you come to see us, you must be guilty. Our mailman this week, as always, staggering under the load of the mail he delivers, is one Gary F. Taylor, born and raised, that's right. And our erstwhile producer, always, the hardest working, or excuse me, not our producer, our engineer. As I said, no beers were harmed in this broadcast. Our engineer this week and every week is our own Brendan Krell. Thank you for listening. We'll see you again next week. So long, everybody.